Hi, good morning. I'm Katie Tam. I'm a health coach with Logansport Memorial Hospital. Today we're going to be walking through Martin's here in Logansport and talking a little bit about what are some good things to buy at the store, doing some comparing and contrasting of different products, some tips while shopping. And really we're just going to follow kind of the layout of the store today. So we'll hit on like produce, the bakery, bread area, dairy, meat, seafood, canned goods, condiments, pretty much everything, the frozen section. So we'll walk around, we'll kind of compare certain things, and we're just going to go ahead and get started here in the produce section. And a couple things to get started with the produce section is it's really important to try to include a fruit or a vegetable at most meals. ChooseMyPlate.gov actually recommends doing like half your plate fruits and vegetables. So when you come to the store, finding maybe a couple different fruits, a couple different vegetables so you have throughout the week. And you can do, fresh, frozen, or canned, but in the purpose of the produce section, we're gonna focus on the fresh side of things and, looking for sales, looking for what's in season. If there's a good sale, making sure that you are maybe stocking up on those and you can freeze them for later. So we'll walk around and kind of look at what's available here at Martin's and kind of look at how you can see the different sales that they have. So we'll go ahead and get started. We'll kind of just look at we'll start here at the salad, sorry. So for convenience sake, they have in most stores a lot of packaged salads for you, and you're more than welcome to just get a head of lettuce or cut it up, or a head of romaine and cut that up. But a lot of times when we're coaching and talking to people, it's really hard to always be prepping something. So taking advantage of the different types of bag salads they have. And again, you can see here a lot of times they'll have, if you have a card especially, they'll have sales on things. So something like the hearts of romaine is 2 for $5 right now, so that might be a better option to get versus something that's like $3.50 normally. So this is definitely a convenience thing for most people. Same thing here with cantaloupes right now. They're starting to come into season, so they're gonna start coming down in price a little bit. And a lot of things like strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, we're not quite in season with those right now, so you may not see a sale. Sometimes you might see like a 2 for $4 on a strawberry or 2 for $5, and right now they're about $4 for a smaller package. So something like that you might buy frozen versus fresh right now. And I do want to mention the organic versus regular. So there's not necessarily anything that's superior about organic besides the fact of how pesticides are used on them. So really it's a personal preference on what you decide to do on organic versus non-organic. A lot of times people will say that they taste better, but as far as, like terms of calories, the nutritional content of them, there's really not a whole lot of difference with them. So if you prefer organic, that's fine, you can do that. If you don't want to spend the extra money on organic, that's fine too. Either way, you should be like washing your vegetables and making sure that you're rinsing them before you use them. So I just wanted to point that out as I saw this sign. And I do want to make a point on sometimes it's cheaper to buy a bag of apples versus buying them individually, or a bag of anything versus individually. It just depends on what's in season. So right now apples are not necessarily in season, but as they become in season in the fall, that's something that you might find is cheaper just to buy a big bag of them versus just buying them individually. Okay, so we looked at the fresh produce, and now we're gonna get a little bit more into the canned produce. So canned vegetables, canned fruit. There's nothing wrong with choosing these options. A lot of times it's, again, for convenience. They stay good for much longer than something that's fresh. So as we kind of look down this aisle, the one thing that I wanted to point out with some of these things is making sure that you can find lower sodium options of them, and for the vegetables, and with fruit, finding the options that are packed in water or packed in their own juice. So as we walk down this aisle, I'll find a recommendation for it. So I wanted to show the difference between a no salt added and just a regular petite diced tomato. And as we flip these around here, you can see that, you know, the calories are the same, the serving sizes are all the same, but when you come down to this no salt added sodium level here, we have 15 milligrams versus about 200. While the 200 is not necessarily high, it's just something to look for, especially if you know maybe have heart problems or you're working on blood pressure. Most canned goods, you should be able to find some type of lower sodium option. This is just one that I picked out here at this store, but again, you will find in most places that there will be some type of no sodium option for you. And as we go down to the fruit at the end of the aisle here, same type of thing. There will be different options as far as what are the best. You know, you can do stuff that's packed in water versus packed in heavy syrup, and I can show you the difference on those labels down here as well. Okay, so here's the same thing with some peaches. This one says it's packed in extra light syrup. So again, you can go to the back on this one. You can see here the total sugars are 13 grams. There's about 6 grams of added sugar. And on the back of this no sugar added, you know, you can see that there's going to be some sugar in it just because it's a fruit, but the added sugars down here at the bottom, you can see that there's 0 grams. And while we're not going to be able to eliminate sugar completely, especially with things like fruit, you want to try to keep your added sugar intake at less than, you know, 35 to 25 grams per day. So any way that you can do that, especially when it comes to this canned stuff, is the better way to go. And again, you'll find that with most of the fruit in the aisle. You know, some of them are going to be packed in heavy syrup, some will be packed in water or their own juice. Same thing with like applesauce, because there's some applesauce down there. If you can buy the non-sweetened version, you can always add your own spices to it. So like cinnamon, maybe some nutmeg or something. That way you can control how much sugar is going into these things, because they are convenient, they are nice to have on hand. It's just sometimes they'll add some of those things in there to keep them, to add some flavoring to it. And I do want to mention beans that you can get. You can get dried beans, but a lot of times, again, people are going to come here and get just beans in a can because it's much more convenient. It doesn't take as much time to cook them. They're fairly, you know, inexpensive, and if you can find a sale on these things, you know, make sure you stock up on them. But again, these are going to have the same type of thing. You can find lower sodium options, and you can find regular options. Sometimes people will rinse them, sometimes people will just dump them into their recipe, but whatever, you know, you prefer, you can kind of take a look here and use this for convenience versus buying a bag of dried beans and trying to fix them that way. Okay. So as we were walking around the canned vegetables and fruit, we saw the granola here, and I wanted to just stop and talk about this for a second, because a lot of times people will buy granola as a healthy option to top on their yogurt. So I wanted to just point out some differences in some of these brands here. The one thing you want to look for in granola is just making sure that it's not loaded with a lot of added sugar. So as we go through and look at some of these, Bear Naked is considered a pretty good brand when it comes to that. But let's go. As we start looking at some of the different, or the differences here on Nature Valley versus Bear Naked, they are pretty equivalent when it comes to calories, fat. But when we look at the added sugar down here, you do see that there is a bit of a difference actually with Nature Valley has about 17 grams of added sugar when you consume about a 2/3 cup or a bowl of it, versus Bear Naked being at about 10 grams for that same serving size. But the other thing is, Nature Valley is going to have more protein in it than Bear Naked, so it's kind of, it's just a trade-off. You have to decide what's more important to you. If you need that extra protein versus maybe not as much, or maybe you're worried about your sugar intake, so you're going to go with something like Bear Naked. So just taking the time to maybe read through some of the labels of these things. You can always make your own. It's fairly easy to make your own granola with buying, you know, regular oatmeal and kind of adding your own sugar so you can control it on your own spices. But there's nothing wrong with eating these things. It's just maybe taking a closer look at what is on the label and what's in the actual granola. So the pasta aisle, or some of the pasta aisle here, with these boxed mac and cheese, the rice that's boxed Hamburger Helper. So again, nothing necessarily wrong about getting some of this stuff. It's just you have to watch the calorie intake, the fat intake, the sodium on a lot of these prepackaged foods is going to be incredibly high. So, doing some comparing and contrasting on them. And when I looked at them, this particular brand here, it's saying that, it's called That's Smart. So you kind of look at it and you think that it's going to be healthier. And when you start to look at, and I won't come over there and show them, but when you start to look at the sodium intake on some of these, this is actually higher than some of them that are just the regular like Kraft macaroni and cheese. So again, that's why it's really important to look at the label on them to make sure that they actually are the better option. Again, this is something that you can maybe just try to do on your own, add your own stuff to it so you don't have to buy these things. But when you look at some of these brands, I know that Annie's is a little more expensive and it's labeled as organic, but it does have less sodium than some of the other ones that are available here. So it really just depends on your goals and what you're looking for. So if sodium is something you're worried about, maybe looking for the ones with the lower sodium. If fat intake is something you're looking for, then just read these labels. But from what I looked at the other day, that Annie's brand tends to be the better brand when it comes to the nutrition to these things. When it comes to condiments, finding, like I'm looking at the salad dressing right now, so a lot of times you can get fat-free, you can get, something that's, a little lighter. It's not necessarily, like you don't have to always do that. Oil base is going to be better than like a creamier dressing. But again, it just comes down to, paying attention to some of these labels and looking at the actual sodium content. And they're different between all the brands. So, but if you can focus on the oil base versus the creamiers, like the blue cheese, the ranch, that tends to be a better option just because they're lower in calories, lower in fat intake. I'm looking here to see, there's some brands that are a little bit better when it comes to these things, but I'm not seeing it here. But when we look at maybe Healthy Choice, they're trying to make a little bit of a difference in some of their dressings. So like they have a plant power garden ranch. This has 45 calories versus Kraft's Classic Ranch, which has 120 calories per serving. So that's, again, why it's important to kind of look at these labels and take a look at what might be a little bit of a healthier option for something that you might like. So the oatmeal is something I definitely wanted to hit on. It tends to be a good option for breakfast in the mornings. It's a good way to get some fiber in. But the same thing that I've kind of been saying throughout this whole presentation is, you can do stuff that's already packaged. You just really have to watch the added sugar in these. You want to make sure there's enough fiber in it. There's all sorts of different brands here. And Quaker's actually kind of gotten into some different, like high fiber. They have a protein kind here now. And you can compare and contrast some of these different ones here. So if we look at like Kodiak tends to be a good brand. So if we compare the two, at first glance, they're pretty similar. This packet is going to be a little more calorie-wise, but not much more. The fat intake or the fat content is pretty much the same. The sodium, the carbs, this is a little more carbs. The fiber is actually more fiber in this one than this, but not much more. Sugar is about the same. They both have 10 grams of added sugars. This one has less protein, but only 2 grams. The ingredients are pretty similar. They both have whole grain oats, is the first thing there, and that's important. You want to make sure it's whole grain. So really, you know, it's a preference. You know, one is $5.59, the other one's $4.79. So, you know, if price is something that you're looking at, that's something to kind of take into consideration. But, you know, there's other options of oatmeal over here. You just want to make sure you're getting the most bang for your buck, because some of these oatmeals are not going to have a lot of protein in them. They might have some fiber, but it might not have much holding power. So it is important to make sure that there's something additional to it, like the protein, to give you some staying power. And like you can see, like this is a lot cheaper to buy than a box of this at $4.79. So again, it's up to you. And then you can always make your own. So if you look down here, you know, you can buy a big thing of oats for $3.49 and make your own protein oats. There's all sorts of recipes out there for like overnight oats, where you can add pretty much whatever you want to it. So I've always recommended, you know, kind of making your own and controlling what's going in there versus buying these, but much more convenient to buy a packet of stuff versus making it every single day. Okay, when it comes to cereal, kind of the same thing as oatmeal. We're looking for stuff that's made with grains. We're looking for stuff that has some high fiber content in it. And Cheerios tends to be one that is touted as a good option for cereal. Quaker, you can see on the box here, it says 100% whole grains, fiber 1. So these are decent options for cereal when it comes to eating some breakfast food. Again, you want to just stay away from things that have a lot of added sugar in them. So, you know, like the things like Lucky Charms, Trix, all those things that, while they taste delicious or our kids love them, maybe for us, we need to stick with the things that have a little more fiber content to them and are made with whole grains. Okay, so when it comes to crackers and like the snacky chip type things, Triscuit tends to be one of the better options just because it's made with whole grains. It doesn't have a lot of added sugar in it, a lot of extra fat. So especially their original ones here, you know, things like Wheat Thins, they are 100% whole grain, but they do contain some added sugar in them. They're not a bad option, but when it comes to those crackers, if you can focus on something that's whole grain versus just a regular cracker, kind of like the Ritz, you know, they have a whole grain option, which is good, but Triscuit tends to kind of be the best option there. And if you find, you know, a sale on some of them, so you can see down here how the bigger box, the family size, is on sale right now for just about 10 cents more than a regular box. So again, paying attention to those sales versus just kind of grabbing whenever, wherever. Granola bars are another one, or like breakfast bars are another one that people tend to kind of gravitate to in a store. And again, just like everything else, you know, making sure that you're paying attention to that nutrition label. Kind tends to be a better option for picking something out like this. Nature Valley has some good stuff too. But again, just pay attention to those contents on the back. So when I look at the protein content and something that's labeled as a protein bar, let me see here. We'll do Kind versus just the store brand. So on the left hand is the Our Family brand versus the Kind bar. So you can see that this is a little less calories on the left hand side. This is a little more on the right hand side. It is 50 grams versus 40 grams as far as like the volume goes, so it is a little bit more. But when you start comparing things, this actually is not a bad option here on the left. So there's more fat in it, but as you go down and look at the label, there's actually quite a bit of healthy fat in this bar. The carbs are actually less than the Kind bar. There's more fiber in this bar versus the Kind one, and there's actually less added sugar and there's more protein. So this is again why it's important to take a look at the different the labels, and this actually ends up being a cheaper option for about the kind of the same type of thing. So not a bad option, a good option, but not a bad option either. So I wanted to point out kind of the canned meat here with the tuna and the salmon. This is a good option for protein for a lot of people. It's convenient. And it's really, there's nothing wrong with getting these. You can do, you know, you can do a packet or you can do a can. The can tends to be a little bit less than the packet. You can see here again that this is going to be lower sodium. You know, packed in water tends to be a better option. So protein is important in the aspect that it just keeps us fuller for longer. So any way that you can get that in, especially in a convenient way like packaged or canned tuna, is a good route to go. So pasta is another one that people feel like they have to cut out of their diets when I'm talking to them during coaching, and there's actually not bad options when it comes to some pasta. There's obviously like kind of our regular pasta, but there's whole grain options, and there's kind of vegetable options now that they're making, and I can pull them here. So these things tend to be, and I picked all Barilla for some reason. These things tend to be the better options when it comes to the pasta, just because it's made with vegetables. So like red lentils, chickpeas, whole grain, you know, is another good one. And like this middle one is a protein kind, so it has more protein than regular pasta, and it's made out of, or it's plant-based. So if you're gonna go with pasta, you know, if you can go these routes, that's fine. They do tend to be a little more expensive, so if they're on sale, I would suggest stocking up on them, and that way you can get more bang for your buck nutritionally. So pasta sauce, just because we were just talking about pasta, same thing here. There tends to be like some hidden sugar in pasta sauces, so if you can find stuff that is no sugar added, or lower sodium, which I do see some lower sodium. Prego has some lower sodium. I'm having a hard time finding no added sugar though in front of me. I don't see any here. Sometimes you can find those in other stores. Some other brands that are good would be like Rao's, which is R-A-O-S, and I'm not seeing that here either. I'm trying to find it for you guys. But there's nothing wrong with a lot of these brands that are here. It's just making sure that you can find the lower sodium options and the no added sugar options. The tomato base is going to be obviously a little better than like an Alfredo base. You might be better off making your own Alfredo, but again, nothing wrong with getting the Alfredo. Just gearing towards the tomato base tends to be the better option. So the packaged seasoning, again, a lot of these, because they're packaged seasonings, they're going to have a lot of sodium in them. So you can see here, like taco seasoning, there's a 30% less sodium versus just the regular. Sometimes that less sodium can actually be more sodium than another brand, so you would have to check the different brands there, because they can be a little different. So yes, like Mrs. Dash has a salt-free taco seasoning mix, so you can always make your own. You don't have to go this route. Most people will have the actual seasonings in their cabinet to make taco seasoning, chili, seasoning. But if you can go that salt-free route and then kind of add your own salt, that tends to be the better option for these things. And as we go down here, I wanted to hit on the rice. So rice is another one that people will get a lot of times because it's just easy to have on hand and it goes with most meals. The one thing I wanted to point out with rice is, it's a lot cheaper to just buy a bigger bag of it and cook it on your own and kind of have it that way. But these are so convenient if you need to just do something quickly. And the thing though, you have to watch for is when you start adding the seasonings and the flavorings, it's going to tremendously bring the sodium level up versus something that's just, long grain white rice, or wild rice. It's going to have less calories, less fat, less sodium. So if you're going to go the convenience route, making sure that you're looking at those and trying to add your own seasonings versus already buying something seasoned. Pretty much like all of these are going to be really high in sodium down here. But it's, again, cheaper to just buy a big bag at $1.99 versus a little box of it at $1.19 and make your own stuff. So we're in the meat section right now, and when it comes to proteins and meats and stuff, it's important to make at least a fourth of your plate some type of protein. So any way that you can get that in, whether it's beef, chicken, fish, we talked a little bit about tuna earlier, but a lot of times there's going to be some type of sale going on, you know, taking a look at these things and finding how you can get that meat source or that protein source in. And sometimes it's nice to just have a couple different options, so like maybe ground beef and chicken or fish and chicken. But I always recommend for people to look at the sales that are going on at whatever store they're shopping at. So like right now, they're having a sale on their ground beef on a family pack. They're having a sale on their boneless pork chops. So when there's sales like that, if you can stock up on that, you can freeze some of it for later. That way you can budget a little bit better or have some stuff on hand. But there's, you know, nothing really wrong with the types of meat. It's just looking for stuff that is leaner. So if you're gonna do ground beef, you know, finding the lean versions of it, like the 90 or the 95%. If you're gonna do chicken, you know, buying the chicken breasts. If you're gonna do other red meats, you know, sticking to loin, sticking to, you know, staying away from the fattier cuts of like steaks. That's kind of the important thing when it comes to the meat, and finding ways to save money on that. So in this section, we have more of like the sausage and stuff. Again, nothing wrong with these things, but they tend to be a little higher in sodium, a little higher in fat because of their processing. So if you can stick to like the chicken, the lean beef, the fish, that tends to be a better option. But again, you know, there's a sale on some of these things. So if that's something that your family enjoys, by all means, you know, you can use this as one of your protein sources. But just being aware that, you know, the sausage, the bacon, the hot dogs, those are going to not necessarily be the most nutritious option that you can pick. So deli meat is another one that's pretty convenient for a lot of people to have as like a lunch most of the time. And there's certain brands that are a little bit better than others. As far as what's here at Martin's, you know, they have this Natural Choice brand that's pretty good. And they have Oscar Mayer Natural, that's good. So those tend to be better than something like Budding, even though Budding's a little cheaper. It's gonna have a little less sodium, you know, trying to find things that are made without nitrates or some other additives in it. You can always go to the deli counter. Sometimes they'll have lower sodium options of things there as well. So nothing wrong with deli meat. It's just, again, if there's certain goals that you have in mind, you know, getting the ones that are a little bit closer aligned with those goals tend to be the better option. So the freezer section is another section that should be utilized. Obviously, there's things in the freezer section that are like snacky, like your pizza, maybe pizza rolls, you know, breadsticks, desserts, ice cream. But also in the frozen aisle, there are things like fruits and vegetables. So I mentioned earlier that there's nothing wrong with eating frozen fruits and vegetables. You just want to make sure that they are, you know, maybe no heavy sauces, no added sugar. So people will use the frozen fruits for like things like smoothies, or they'll thaw them out and put them on top of yogurt or oatmeal. The vegetables, you know, you can get the steamer bags, so like Bird's Eye, Green Giant, they both have some really good options. And, you know, you can utilize those in a lot of different recipes and soups and casseroles, for omelets, things like that. So the thing that I want to mention with the frozen section is they're going to be maybe a tad bit more expensive, but a lot of times there's sales, so stocking up when there's a sale, you know, they're not going to go bad as quickly. You can get out of season things maybe a little cheaper than what you would find in the fresh produce aisle. So any way that you can find those, if that's what you want. There's other things in the frozen aisle, like, for example, breakfast options, like frozen waffles. There's actually some breads that you can get in the frozen aisle, like Ezekiel bread. That's a pretty good option for a whole grain when it comes to bread. So some of the frozen breakfast options that I should mention are like Vans, Kodiak. They both have a protein, like whole grain waffle versus like Eggo. So that would be the better option to get when it comes to like a breakfast option. Okay, so just to compare these two, on first glance, this one's less calories, so someone might want to reach for it. But when you look at this one versus just the Eggo brand, you can see that there's some pretty notable differences. So like, yes, the total fat is going to be lower on this one, but as we go down, the grams of added sugar is about the same, but the protein is quite a bit less. And the other thing that you got to look at is the ingredients. So this Kodiak brand here on the right is going to be made from 100% whole grain wheat flour versus this one, which is just enriched flour. The difference between whole grain and just regular flour is whole grains is going to have more fiber, which is going to help with things like heart disease, like diabetes control, blood sugar control, appetite control. So while this has more calories, it's still going to be the better option because of its makeup and its ingredients and its protein intake. Okay, when it comes to like the bakery or the bread products, you want to make sure that you are reaching for 100% whole wheat or 100% whole grain. It's important that we make at least half of our grains whole grains. And I mentioned earlier, you know, fiber is going to be found in those whole grain or whole wheat products. And when we have fiber in our diet, it's going to help with blood sugar control. It's going to help with heart health, appetite control, just feeling full. So that's why it's important to pick that 100% whole wheat or 100% whole grain. And that 100% is kind of the key word there, because a lot of times you'll see things that are just like honey wheat, cracked wheat. It's a little misleading because it means that there's still some enriched flour in there. Again, nothing necessarily wrong with enriched flour. It's just that all the good stuff is removed during the processing part of it. So if you can find things that say 100% whole wheat, you know, brands like Dave's Killer Seed Bread is a good brand, but you know, you have to do what's best for you as far as price, because Dave's is $6.39 per loaf versus like Bunny, which is $2.29. You also want to make sure that you are looking at serving sizes when it comes to some of these things and how many calories are in them. Something like Bunny will have, find it here. So 2 slices is 120 calories versus something like, let me see. Well, Healthy Life, I can't find the normal whole wheat version of it, but their, you know, 1 slice is closer, or 2 slices is closer to 60 calories. So, you know, if you get 100% whole wheat versus the 2 brands, one can be a little bit better depending on what your goals are. But again, just there's, you know, nothing wrong with Dave's Killer Seed, and there's nothing wrong with Bunny as long as it's that 100% whole wheat or 100% whole grain. Okay, so dairy, we'll kind of hit on cheese, milk, and yogurt as well. So when it comes to cheese can be high in saturated fat content, which can kind of mess with heart health, sodium content, which can mess with blood pressure. So if you want, you can do the lower fat versions of some of these things. Another thing I wanted to point out though was pre-shredded versus block cheese. So pre-shredded, obviously much more convenient for a lot of people when it's on sale, if you can, you know, stock up on it during that time. But if you're one that really likes to just eat cheese like cube cheese, it's almost cheaper to buy it in a block and cut it up yourself. You know, again, looking at the differences in price versus a name brand versus a store brand, you can see that this Crystal Farms is $4.99 for already cut up cheese. So if you want to just buy a block and cut it up yourself, it's cheaper that way. And with these, again, you know, just making sure that you're looking at the the fat content in them. Some of them are going to be different between brands. Okay. Yogurt is another one that a lot of people will focus on here, and it's one of those things that will have some flavoring to it typically, and that's where that added sugar content will come from. So if you can find brands like Chobani here has a 0 sugar Greek yogurt that you can choose versus, you know, their regular Greek yogurt that maybe has a little more added sugar in it. Oikos is another one. The Greek yogurt is going to have more protein content than something just like a Yoplait or like this Light and Fit. So if you can choose the brands that have more protein content and less sugar, that's going to be your best option when it comes to things like yogurt. Okay, so dairy is another one. A lot of people now are, kind of focused on like plant-based dairy. So they have like oat milk, almond milk. You can use those things. They just tend to be they all contain calcium, I guess is the most important things when it comes to dairy. So anyway, you can get that calcium in. But a lot of people will choose those plant-based milks that they can put in things like smoothies or cereal just because they're lower calorie and lower sodium versus like these. There's nothing wrong with this. If you like regular milk, by all means drink this regular milk. It's just like whole milk versus 2% versus skim. There's going to be some difference in calories, fat content. But again, they will all kind of contain the same amounts of vitamin D, calcium, things like that. The thing you want to look for again is just sale prices, so you can see some of the differences in like Fairlife is $4.49 for that size of milk versus like Prairie Farms at $3.99, and then Martin's has even cheaper at $3.69. So the store brand tends to be the cheaper option of all those. So again, if you're looking for something like being on a budget, if you can opt to the store brand, there's usually not much of a difference in taste. It's just that price comes down a little bit with the store brands. In the drink aisle here, I wanted to just hit on, obviously people have been told, things like pop and alcohol can kind of add up very quickly when it comes to nutrition. It can add up in calories, it can add up in added sugar. So the more that we can reduce those things, the better. Even if it's something like Diet Coke or diet drinks versus the regular drink. There's sparkling water here. That's not a bad option. Again, you need to just watch for some of those sparkling juices will have actually sugar in them, about as much as a pop would. So just taking a look at the label to make sure that there's no added sugar. But water, coffee, unsweet tea, those are good options when it comes to beverages. Again, nothing wrong with having an occasional drink, but you want to limit those things because that added sugar, those calories can add up to things like unwanted weight gain. It can lead to things like diabetes or blood sugar control, heart problems. So the more we can choose something like water, sparkling water, unsweet tea, coffee, the better. Eggs are one that people tend to use a lot, whether it's for breakfast, hard-boiled eggs in recipes, whatever. But there's a lot of different options that we got going on here. Really, there's nothing wrong with the, just the plain old white eggs, but there tends to be, as it goes along the spectrum here, the brown eggs tend to be a little bit better. Free range, it's really up to you on what you'd like to do, but just making sure that, it fits into your budget. Again, you can see how these organic free-range eggs are almost $6 versus just something like these grade A jumbo at $2.69. So you still get a lot of nutritional benefit no matter what kind you pick. You can see up here at the top that there is, if you don't like to hard boil your own eggs, you can already buy them hard boiled. You can buy egg whites, you can buy like omelet stuff. So all these are good things to buy. It just depends on how convenient you want things versus just getting your own eggs and kind of doing it all on your own. So that concludes kind of our grocery store tour. We went through all the different sections. We tried to hit on the produce, the bakery, the dairy, frozen section, canned goods. And if you have any questions on that, feel free to reach out to me at ktam@logansportmemorial.org. I'd be more than happy to ask or answer any questions. And kind of just as a final note, I should have mentioned kind of in the beginning that a lot of the sales at most stores are going to be dependent on being a rewards member at some of these places. So Martin's, isn't unique to that. A lot of places will have it, like Kroger, Walmart. If you have like a card with them that you can sign up when you come in, you can scan that card every time you come and shop and get even more savings. And sometimes that can lead to things like gas savings as well, coupons, like personalized coupons. So that's something you definitely want to take advantage of wherever you shop because it's going to give you more savings on these things. And the other thing I wanted to mention is a lot of places now have like a pickup option. So, instead of coming into the store and doing this, you can just download an app and you can pick and choose what you want, and then you can come pick it up, or sometimes they even deliver now. So, looking into those things, because that's only going to help you stick to a budget, get what you need, and get in and out of a store a lot quicker than what it would take normally. So again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out at ktam@logansportmemorial.org. Thank you.